Hi, my name is Sydney. I'm the showgirl astrologer on Instagram, and today I'm here to talk about the total solar eclipse on October 2nd, 2024. We won't be able to see the eclipse in the United States, but if you're in the southern parts of Argentina and Chile, you'll have a front row seat to its full visibility. The total solar eclipse on October 2nd is at 11:49 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm in Oakland, so, I'm going to say it, or 6:45 p.m. Universal Time. So this eclipse is on the south node of Libra, and south node is like a cosmic drain, the cosmic purge, and something needs to be released and let go. And where there's a solar eclipse, the lights go out, kind of like unplugging the sun and then rebooting it. Solar eclipses were once associated with the deaths of rulers and kings. In the past, rituals would be taken to put a substitute king in power during the eclipse so that dynasties could keep their power in place should a disaster or attempt come to the king. Once the danger had passed, the ritually placed king and sometimes their substitute queen as well were then sacrificed in order to appease the gods, in order to escape any fate that was for the actual king in power. As we look around in our world, we see many powerful figureheads and their abuses of power in their various industries being taken out of power and removed. And I think with this eclipse being on the South Node, there's something a bit more potent to this idea. I think this eclipse is notable for it being the last in this axis of Aries and Libra, while Pluto is in Capricorn for its last moments before it's in Aquarius for the next 30 years. It's currently sitting at a critical, anaretic 29th degree. There are things we need to grasp here in order to move forward. The last 20 years, this mighty tiny planet Pluto has exposed the abuses of various financial establishments, governments, and its policies in all of our lives. The kind of abuses that constantly threaten a society's ability to function in healthy ways. What is a healthy society? How can we grow old like this? What do we need to examine, eliminate, and transform so that all humans have the ability to coexist? The nodes being in Aries and Libra for its last gasp could speak to our investigation of our own personal relationship to governments and structures that make up our lives and threaten our free will, as well as our relationships in general. The nodes change into new signs every 18 months, and we are in the final stages of the Aries Libra axis before they shift into Virgo Pisces in July of 2026. The last eclipses on the Libra-Aries axis were the solar hybrid on April 19th and 20th, 2023 at 29 degrees. We'll also note here that Mercury was in Taurus at 15 degrees with the North Node in Taurus at this time. So the Libra-Aries axis of the Sun and the Moon is what I'm talking about here. While the nodes were not in Aries and Libra, they still were ruled by Mars and Venus, respectively, which I think is important and could potentially be a lead up to the shift into the Aries and Libra axis. The next one that we see here is the solar annular October 14th eclipse that happened at 21 degrees Libra. You'll also note that now the nodes have shifted into Aries and Libra, respectively. On March 25th, 2024, we had a lunar penumbral eclipse at 5 degrees Libra. And then on April 8th, 2024, we had a solar total eclipse at 19 degrees Aries, which was on the North Node. And we also note here that Mercury was retrograde at Aries at 24 degrees. So if you have placements in the cardinal signs, particularly the personal planets, so Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, somewhat Jupiter and Saturn, but maybe not so much, in the signs of Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, including having cardinal rising signs, this series may have played special importance in your life, and you may be able to discern the story that these eclipses have held for you. It's also a good to note what houses the sun and moon rule inside of your nativity, which is your natal chart, to determine the area of life that eclipses will always have some sort of impact on. For instance, I'm a Virgo rising, so the moon rules over my 11th house of alliances, organizations, friends, and the sun rules over the 12th house of isolation, secret enemies, suffering, witches, self-undoing, that sort of thing. Super fun. So you'll want to look at what houses Aries and Libra are in your chart to see where this potential releasing time is happening. Cardinal risings will have this a bit more potently, with those who have cardinal planets around the 6 to 10 degrees for this particular eclipse being the most impacted. If you have the sun or moon activated by perfection, which is a Hellenistic technique that can tell us which areas of life take more prominence in a particular year of life, but you don't have any planets in cardinal signs, you may also still have something very significant to occur. We need to remember that eclipses are fated moments. We don't control them, and in some ways, they can be considered great endings, great beginnings, and of course corrections, depending on how we choose to perceive the events that occur. Okay, so some features of this eclipse. The eclipse is in the Aries Libra axis, the axis of relationships, me versus us, with Mars and Venus ruling it. The planets that we would look at in order to understand something about how relationships play out in our lives. This eclipse features the Libra sun and moon at 10 degrees with Mercury at 11 degrees Libra. So Mercury is separating from the sun and the moon is applying to it. Mercury understands something about the personality, about the ego, about the creative identity and purpose, and is now taking that into the moon where we hold our habits and feeling. We also have a grand water trine. And Jupiter in Gemini is being trined by its ruler Mercury, being pulled into this eclipse. We also are featuring a retrograde Pluto, which is in a separating trine to the South Node, which is assisting us in some sort of deep systemic transformation. So let's pull some of these pieces apart and then attempt to put them all back together again. As the sun is in Libra, it is opposite of its exaltation sign of Aries. So we call this being in fall. The sun, having the principle of being the ego or creative self-expression, doesn't necessarily act for its own good in the sign of Libra. Instead, it sees itself through the eyes of the other, and while congenial, it can act in ways that says, I don't want to be alone. Being with you is where I get to be who I want. This could lead to the ego being deferential, placing others above it in order to maintain the peace or harmony that it desires. We could think about this eclipse as a time to explore our unhealthy ego attachments that we hold in being side of various relationships in our lives. Perhaps we need to unplug from some so that we can plug back in to where we are operating in healthier ways. Now, the moon in Libra needs to relate. It feels safe when it's in conversation and relating to others, so much so that when it feels threatened, it may act in ways that are a bit covert in order to maintain the peace and harmony. This is a charming moon. This is a moon that says everything is fine while the room burns around them, should actually speak in their mind, make the flames grow higher. This moon avoids confrontation, but with its ruler being Venus in Scorpio, I think she takes whatever sights or slights she perceives very personally. It's like the veneer of an airy friendliness blowing over the roiling water underneath. Venus, the ruler of both the sun and the moon, and the south node in Libra, is in Scorpio, which is her detriment, and is in an applying trine to Mars. This is a water trine, a trine of emotions, and Mars receives Venus by rulership, and Venus receives Mars in Cancer by triplicity. Venus in Scorpio is a passionate and intense Venus. She wants to crawl into your skin. She wants to merge with her partner. She wants psychological closeness. Venus in Scorpio can also have a bit of a vengeful flair, a desire for complex sort of intensity that only water signs can truly understand and comprehend. She is protective of what she values. And I think with the trine from Mars, she is behaving a bit better than usual, perhaps, due to the trine with her ruler Mars in reception as well. Mars is in watery, emotional, protective, sideways stepping Cancer, the crab. This Mars is protective of its home, its homeland, the principle of mothering and motherhood. This Mars acts out of its emotional drives and is ruled by the moon. So, with the moon in Libra, Mars may be acting to protect itself through attempts to keep the peace, but that's not necessarily working as the moon is with the south node, begging for some habits around this to be relinquished. Mars is an overcoming separating square to the sun and moon, trying to dominate it, perhaps inclining us to take some sort of action. And while Mars is in its fallen Cancer, I think Mars is very much helped by its trine to Venus, which is in his domicile of Scorpio. When Mars is in Scorpio, it's like a laser beam able to act with precision. And so we can hope that with the reception Mars has from Venus, to act a little bit better and with more control of its desire nature. Mars in Cancer is the ruler of the North Node in Aries and is still square to the nodes, which is applying to the South Node of releasing and separating from the North Node of forging ahead. Mars is also in a square to asteroid Chiron, offering some tension around its assertive emotional energy and a bit more sensitivity as well to the wounds that we carry around our actions and identity. So it's notable that the rulers of the nodes are in a harmonious trine to each other, both planets not in signs they're cozy in, but they're helping each other to perhaps psychologically and emotionally understand something in order to let go. The eclipse being on the south node, we must remember this, and behave with a little bit more dignity than they would if they weren't in aspect. I think this is a good time to mention that trines are flowing aspects, and even though that can sound good, it can also just as easily make hard things flow well. The retrograde Saturn in Pisces is also very in play here, creating a grand water trine in the sky. Perhaps a bit of reestablishing emotional boundaries and borders, grounding, or greater harnessing of our emotions through psychological internalizations as we make various releases in our relationships or attachments at this time. This is an intuitive trine, being in all water signs, and Saturn can speak to its ability to be utilized in useful ways. There is a deep sensitivity to this eclipse. Mercury was just in the heart of the sun 2 days prior, meaning it was Kazemi. This term comes from the word kasmimi, meaning as if in the heart, and speaks to a new cycle between Mercury and the sun. It's almost as if Mercury, our processing, communicating, and thinking, visits the heart of the sun to be purified in order to go forth in new ways of understanding. Mercury was retrograde at 24 degrees during the North Node total solar eclipse in Aries on April 8th, 2024, traveling back towards the sun and was absolutely within range to be considered a conjunction to the sun and the moon at 19 degrees. So Mercury was going over old territory during that eclipse. Mercury at its furthest from the sun can only be 28 degrees away. So our messenger Mercury is taking messages from the sun, our creative and ego center, and disseminating its message through various signs and aspects to other planets. In this eclipse, he's talking to Jupiter by trine in opposition to Chiron, our teacher and wise, if not wounded, healer. Mercury in Libra is in a wide applying trine to Jupiter in Gemini, bringing a new plethora of harmonious awareness to the ideas that we hold inside of our relationships. With Mercury being in the sign of relating and Jupiter and the expansive Jupiter making things bigger, but in the sign of ideas and communication. So while Jupiter is in its detriment but it's in trine to its own ruler, Mercury, which offers a support and perhaps a pathway to communicating the various ideas and understandings of what we need to release. Jupiter's in plane here. It's just expanding upon perhaps the situations that come up that need to be let go of at this time. A retrograde Pluto in Capricorn at the anaretic 29th degree. It's in a separating trine to a retrograde Uranus in Taurus, which is perhaps inviting internal and structural liberations and insights that we need to make systemic changes. And with their rulers being a part of that grand water trine in the sky, these shifts are not just happening in our material reality, but our emotional, intuitive lives as well. Pluto is enshrined as South Node, also aiding in a deeper psychological release. A solar eclipse being on the South Node of Libra tells us that something is being let go of, perhaps in a new way, that helps us step away from old patterns around overcompromising, over identifying, over related, to the detriment of ourselves and our identities that could have been sublimating our will to go forward, that North Node in Aries, in new, pioneering, and instinctive ways. While seeking harmony is always a Libra function, trying to balance the scales, sometimes this attempt to balance ultimately harms us and our relationships in the future. Perhaps we find new ways to partner here, a way to be in relationship while honoring ourselves, our identity, and free will that doesn't do us dirty in the long run. I think this eclipse is a cue to trust and work with our intuition and feeling in order to move forward, to integrate the new plethora of ideas we have around communication and connection, to work to integrate our desires to act out in emotional ways with some sensitivity, to consider our needs, but to question if all those needs are up for assimilation or elimination, to let go of what is ultimately not needed in order to protect our hearts, to let go of relationships that are not serving the harmony in our own lives, and to discover perhaps the patterns in our protective nature in order to act in new, instinctual, intuitive ways. I think there's a cue to be brutally honest where we are in order to make it and accept any changes that are presented to us in order to proceed. As we go forward into Pluto in Aquarius, I think we need to know who we are as individuals functioning in our various relationships so that we can do our part in transforming our society into one that is more equitable between all humans, to know what we are fighting for and going into revolutions for, to build new communities that honor each person's unique sense of self. The eclipse only helps us to course correct and place us on paths to our greater evolutions. Sometimes these lessons are painful, as release can bring up grief before clarity. We have some big astrology coming up with that protective Mars in Cancer coming up to oppose Pluto in Capricorn on November 3rd, one last time before Pluto moves into Aquarius, which is right before the election, which is wild. I think we'll be back to talk about that soon. In the meantime, if you're interested in sitting with me for a reading to see where any eclipses may be hitting your chart or natal transits, that sort of thing, I'm your girl. You can schedule with me by going to my website, which is divinewithdevereauxastrology.com. The link is in my bio. And hopefully, I'll also see you on Instagram. And take care.